stories of immigration, because we were high percentage foreign-born for, more than a century when the founding, before the early American settlement founding. So we're on the list, but I'm not so sure we're new immigrant gatewers. We're renewed, really, at least in my opinion. And so this is a map that shows all refugees in Portland. This is from IRCO, the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization. I can't believe they gave me this data. And I tried to be super careful about the way that I mapped it, or my students did actually, I confess. But on this GIS map, what we did was, first of all, we used neighborhood boundaries. We didn't use census tract boundaries. We put everybody together in groups, so you can't really, we didn't geocode by individuals, so they're merged. But you can get the idea that the Gateway District, right near IRCO's, and for a lot of other reasons, economic reasons, has been really the center of resettlement of refugees as a whole. And then from there, Russians stay more than any other group in East Side Portland, especially in the outer suburbs, out to Happy Valley and so forth. And most of the sub-Saharan African refugees, which is a whole different experience of groups, of course, in terms of skin color and adjustment, they mostly go to Beaverton and go to the west suburbs. So there's a real interesting racial divide that's developing. This map, by the way, is the same base map. This is where we map just the people that were born in Russia or Ukraine. Some of the data is for former Soviet Union or Soviet Union. But I don't believe any of these data sources. I don't know how you are about that, Sergey, but I'd love to talk. But I especially don't trust the U.S. Census, because people that don't speak English can't fill out those long forms. And we don't even have the long forms in 2010. We have them, but we just have we have a whole different system now. So I have to show you these older maps, because it just would be cheating if I try to act like I know what the differences are. At the end of this, in just a moment, I'll make some predictions about them. So the definition of refugees, I think you're probably all okay because you're in a group like this, but it's a group that the U.S. government defines based on the Geneva Convention. People that are living outside their homeland who just can't go back. Either they say they can't go back because they'll be persecuted, or they're afraid they'll be persecuted. There's the answer in a big way. Because these are evangelical Christians who weren't allowed before and after the Stalin years, but especially after the 1950s, to practice their religion. And so a lot of people were able to get visas, well, because of the refugee status. And a lot of people were not able to get visas, like the Jewish story that we just heard. And the persecution was there for them as well. But this was the group that really was, the evangelicals were really targeted by those early years of the Soviet Union's breakup, I hate that word, and Reagan's being in power here, and then passing through those years, the conservative politics in the U.S. that came and went during the next decades. All of that is part of why this group were refugees. I personally think that's weird after the Cold War ended. Not that it's ended, it seems to be back. But after it ended, we were still refugees, so maybe I shouldn't be saying that now. This was a family I stayed with in Ukraine. They're actually on the cover of my book, Russian Refuge. I have a picture on the cover of before and after, and I couldn't find, I didn't want to scan it. It seems sacrilegious to scan my own cover, but I couldn't find the other picture. But this is the way people look. This is a typical Ukrainian Baptist family. They are really, really depressed. That's not just because of the smiling problem, which incidentally I was told means that I'm thinking a dirty thought if I smile. I'm very smiley, and that's my worst problem with Russian. My Russian, as Richard and others know, it's my face, not my, Anyway, this was a very big struggling story, and they did all come to Sacramento, and I have a picture of them in their T-shirts under an apple tree, looking so different. And so, in terms of your research for this project, boy, do I wish I'd tracked these people over the years. This is the early 90s, and to go back and talk to Victor, and find out what happened to him when he became, like a baby boomer. He's trying to do whatever happened to him during the recession, and that would be a great topic to do a longitudinal study of that. This is more what Pentecostals and Baptists and Seventh-day Adventist Russian speakers look like now in Oregon. They don't all eat bananas like this, but they do a little bit more up to date. And so just to bring this together then, this is all about it's about networks. It's about transnational, regional, local, all of that. It's all about that in terms of the kinds of ways that this all worked out. So the refugee networks, the evangelical networks, the networks in Portland, like SOAR, Sponsors Organized to Assist Refugees, even Lutheran Social Services, and individuals and families that have jumped in and become sponsors. And all of those things have played a part in people coming here in such large number. And there's so many social service networks in Portland. As a person that lives in Eugene, I'm really impressed. I mean, you can see I'm like a complete Portlandia freak anyway, and my students are largely from Portland, I might say, in many of my classes, and they're glad to hear that, but I'm just way carried away with it. But I do see the way that it's handled here in terms of resettlement to be, as I said, very visionary. Especially ERCO, which has a, I'll show you the building in a moment if you haven't seen it. But there's other groups, the minority entrepreneurs. You can go to all these groups for data for your project. You can go to Oregon Social Services. You've already done that, Tatiana, I know. Probably some of you students have. You can go to the Refugee Immigrant Consortium in Oregon, Southwest Washington, although there's some state sort of competition there that makes it hard to interview them. But they're if you don't speak Russian, this last group is very helpful. I found to be very helpful. So just to look at some of these buildings that are scattered across the urban landscape. SOAR. Here's ERCO out on Northeast Gleason Street. It's big time. 80 languages are spoken, 211 or something. One of my students is working there now. I'm so happy about that. You get lots of data from me, I hope. But she said 211 different employees, so I was very impressed to hear that. There's other evidence here, though. This is kind of the end. Let's look around and see what's out there, starting with some of us are going to have a drink or dinner afterwards tonight. And that's a landscape evidence I don't have a picture of. I tried to drive around and find it with my phone before I came here so I could send an email to myself or whatever and put it in here, but I couldn't find it. So the geographer was on the loose and lost in the local landscape. But the visible things, the most visible thing are the churches. There's well over 250 Russian or Ukrainian Slavic evangelical churches. And they're struggling because some of the churches now have both groups together as members. Some of them are Ukrainian, some of them are Russian. Ukrainians are a bigger group, by the way, than Russians in Portland. But, with all that's happening now in terms of the whole confusion about the Crimea, there's so much dispute in the church that's not about how to spell Jesus or how to do the cross or anything. It's about geopolitics, really, for good reason. Other evidences, though, let me go back just for a minute. Other evidences are the ESL classes or ELL classes, English as Second Language courses. They don't just have Spanish that are being taught now. They have a lot of Russian. This is one of the classes in Woodburn. And the middle school kids are just largely, of course, they're largely Russian there. Even though Woodburn's now more than 60% Latino, it's still, the schools show the evidence of the presence of Russian. As do the signs on health department, signs everywhere that have usually now Spanish, English, and Russian. Sometimes even this Russian's not at the bottom like this. Sometimes it even gets second place after English. And so that's an interesting thing to watch shifting in our landscape. There's also businesses. You can get the Slavic yellow pages. That was a breakthrough for one of my students. And you can count. I'd love to.
Because Sergey wanted.
Sergey. I can't see you. I hear. I can't see you.
Thank you.
I'm glad. Yeah. I just have to always have students where I can see them because they do things.
Yeah.
So I hope you're behaving down there, Sergey. But the churches, really show up. And then we counted, my students and I have counted more than 400 Russian or Ukrainian-owned businesses, not just that people frequent those businesses that are Russian-speaking, but they actually are owned by that. And we have them mapped. This is an old sort of picture from Foster Road. They used to mainly be on Foster Road off the 205. There was a whole stretch there, and they still are in the funeral home business there and restaurants. But this was a restaurant that was there. I'm not sure it is now. I hope it is. I don't think so. But I thought it would be interesting to use Foster Road just to emphasize the shifting landscape that's just ever-changing, really. And I have to go back again. Most of the businesses that we counted were things like this on this list. But I want to say about construction companies, that's a really big one. And in fact, I've been told repeatedly in interviewing people in Portland that are Russian-speaking evangelicals, that Susanna, you never have to learn English, not a word, to live in Portland, Oregon. Because you can be born at a clinic and have the labor coach help you in Russian. You can die and have the funeral home on Foster Road handled. You can have your house built, have plumbers and all that. You never really have to learn the language that Tatiana is insisting that you learn before the end of the season. I shouldn't say that. Likewise, these video stores and others, early evidence on Foster Road that have now passed away in many ways. Excuse the funeral reference. So the last slide I have is just to ask you, if you would, for a moment, to think about where will they be the next time Tatiana calls this auspicious gathering together. And here are the speakers. The students in the room are the speakers. Richard Morris and I have long since passed on the landscape. Okay, hopefully you won't, but I know I will. And so when you think, I'm sorry, but he was my original inspiration for my Russian thing in many ways, and I didn't even know we didn't even know each other. That was so frightening. We were like right next to each other, and the good news is you didn't know me, and I didn't know you. If it was one or the other, that would have been better. So when you think about the future...
40 years ago.
I know, it was a long time ago. When you think about the patterns that I've talked about today, and you think about projecting down the road, what if the census finally does get their act together in 2020 and gives us some better categories of ethnic identity and place of birth and all that, and gives us the data that we need as scholars to be able to work on this? Because my data is from church membership lists and speculation at ERCO. You can't trust my data. I don't even trust quantitative data at all. I'm so sorry, Sergey, but this group is, as you know, is really hard to pin down numbers, as you pointed out so beautifully at the beginning. So when you think about where they will be in Portland, I'll just take a guess as a geographer. I know they'll be suburban. I know they won't be down in the Pearl District. They're not going to go downtown. I don't think they're going to go to near the, PSU or anything. Just a guess. I may be wrong. But when you think about them, they're going to be an aging population too, because they're no longer refugees. So family members are coming in, but they're here, they're grounded, they're rooted in this amazing city. And they're stretching out just like all other immigrant groups do. And yet they don't really get noticed. They're just so invisible. So I think I'd like to, as the final speaker, just to kind of suggest to all of us that there are so many questions about, since the four of us presented, we've left you with far more questions than answers. And so I just had the chills thinking about you students that are going to go out there and hopefully start looking for landscapes, start going through the yellow pages, start doing the census but not trusting it, and just really going to church and doing all those things that you probably need to be doing. I just beg of you to host something like this when I have to be brought in some way, in a locker or whatever, and we will have future patterns, I'll figure that